Hello anglers, how's it going? My name is Shannon Gallagher, I'm with Sudden Impact Swimbaits. If you're watching this, it's because you're either interested in purchasing our Bluegill swim bait, or you've already purchased it and you've scanned the QR code on the packaging which brought you this video about how to rig the bait. So without any further introduction, we're going to be talking about the baits, about the hooks we use to rig them, and about the gear we fish them on. So stick around, we'll walk you through this. Alright, to start us out on rigging, we have three different sizes of this bait. The two smaller ones are fairly similar, but you can see when we overlap them, one's slightly smaller, and with these high profile baits, it's going to take a different hook. That's a big deal and we'll get into that later. But before we do, we'll talk about the big bait. This is our big Bluegill. It takes a 10-0 beast hook. These 10-0 beast hooks right here. The medium size likes a 6-0 beast hook, and the little guy has a couple rigging options, including a 5-0 flashy swimmer and some modifications of a 4-0 beast hook, and we'll get into that as well. Before we get any further, I'd like to say that all of our baits like the large owner CPS spring, and we'll get into how to apply that to a hook, because some of the hooks like the 5-0 flashy swimmer and the 4-0 beast require a change. I keep an extra bulk pack of these on me because sometimes I will fish a gamakatsu hook on some of our other baits, and this spring leaves something to be desired. The large owner CPS spring is where it's at. All right, so one of the things I want to show you about these CPS springs that I haven't seen in a whole lot of weedless rigging videos, and this is important, it applies to any weedless rigging application you're doing. In fact, we'll start out with something simpler than the bluegill, because the bluegill can be a little bit of a complicated bait to rig. So say we have our CPS spring, large CPS spring out of the package, and we've got our hook. This is a 4-0 beast. So what we want to do is we want to come from the left side when we start screwing it in, the left side of the hook eye. So you can see the hook eye there. It's going to be my right, because it's turned around, your left. And we're going to start the CPS spring like that. What that's going to do is it's going to clock the spring so that it's correct in the eye of the hook. And when we go to rig, in a moment here, you're going to see it's important that that last spring is on the top. We'll see why in just a minute. So we've demonstrated how to put the CPS spring on there on another hook. I want to show you a factory stock owner hook, and you'll notice it's rigged exactly like we did that. So when owner applies their own CPS springs, they come in from that left-hand side as you're looking down the hook. So anytime we rig a weedless swim bait, and we're going to start out with something a little bit simpler because we need some building blocks to get us to rigging the bluegill. A trick that I want to show everybody that I haven't seen much is when we look at this spring, there's a start. Just like a thread on a bolt, there's a start, and that's the end of the wire. So we'll use the pin, the centering pin, where it gets its CPS name from, center pin spring, and we'll put it in the nose of the bait as center as we can get it. Just like that. You can see it's right in there. Now what's going to be important here, and what I want you to see, is that we want that start, the end of that coil spring, at the 6 o'clock position on the bait. And you'll see why in just a second here when we thread it on. So I'm starting at the 6 o'clock position. This is going to get even more important with the bluegill, because the bluegill actually has a slot for the eye of the hook. And if we miss, we're going to struggle. But when we start at that 6 o'clock position, and then our bait is on there, and our CPS spring is level, we've brought our hook eye perfectly flush to the bait. That's why we do that. I haven't seen that in a whole lot of rigging videos, so I wanted to share that with our customers because we want you guys to be successful. So from that point, we've got our CPS spring in, we're happy with where everything is. What we want to do, and this is our 5-inch weedless 360 torpedo swim bait, is we want to line our beast hook up on the side of the bait, and you'll notice we've got our Sudden Impact name on here, and I'm right between the D and the E in Sudden. Maybe you can see that, but you can see it's lined up. The other thing I want to show you at this point, this bait sits perfectly on a stock 6-0 beast hook. What I mean by that is the hook point is flush with the top of the bait where it will sit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and rig it. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this whole bait like that. And we're going to come as vertically as we can. And I can just barely feel the hook point in my finger. Now I want to check and make sure that I'm on the center line. When I'm satisfied that I'm as close to the center line as possible, I'll pull it through. See that? Right on center line. So what you got there, the bait's rigged straight, it's ready to fish, it's good to go. This is an easy bait to rig. That's why we started with this one. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna make sure our center pin spring is clocked. We're gonna line up our hook, thread it on, and then we're good to fish. It doesn't change much. What changes are some of the intricate details of the bait, but those are what makes the bluegill better. So now that we've rigged the torpedo, which is simple and straightforward, I wanna show you the differences and build on the skills we've got rigging the torpedo to rig the bluegill. This is our medium-sized bluegill, and it's on a 6.0 beast hook as well. So you can see how these baits look completely different on the 6.0 beast, and there's a reason for that. When we're looking at the features on our bluegill, there are several important things. The first, we'll start from the top here, is this back fin, this dorsal fin is actually split, and it's a hook pocket. So I'm gonna separate the fins. This will be an important step in the last part of the rigging process, but I wanna show you, that's where the pointier beast hook will ride. And we'll get into hook orientation where we want that to sit later. But for now, I wanted to show you that because once this dorsal fin's up and together, it creates a tremendous amount of weedlessness, even with moss and things that normally get stuck on weedless baits. Moving to the bottom of the bait, we've got the same thing. So we've got a large hook pocket, and what you'll see in the very back of there is there's a large cavity in there. That accomplishes a couple important things. The first one is when you go to set the hook, the weight on your 10.0 beast hook will be able to shift up into there, and the plastic won't be blocking the hook from transitioning upward and sticking the fish in the roof or the corner of the mouth. The other thing that does, being an air pocket, is it creates buoyancy. And that buoyancy, see if you can see the air pocket, it's right here. You can see that clear space right there. That buoyancy is going to allow this bait to sit on bottom just like that with a 10.0 beast hook in it. We've put them in a bucket of water overnight, and this bait sits upright on bottom like a jig for as long as there's air in there. Now you frog fishermen will know this. Every once in a while you've got to squeeze water out of your frog. Every once in a while you've got to squeeze water out of your gill. So with those things in mind, we're going to get started to rigging these. And we'll show you how to do that first by mocking up our hooks, because our beast hooks are going to require a little bit of a bend out to get them to sit exactly where we want on the bait. Alright, so one of the major differences when we're rigging the bluegill from our conventional weedless swim baits is that before we start with a CPS spring, before we start with anything, we want to make sure that we mock up our hook to the bait. And what I'm talking about when I say that is we want our hook eye sitting right about there, and you'll notice there's this hook slot that runs all the way to the nose of the bait. Our 6 o'clock CPS spring placement is going to get really important with that, because if we don't get it in that slot, it's going to catch the edges of it. And what we want to do is put our hook eye about there, put our weight on a beast hook right about between the fins. This will change a little bit when we use the flashy swimmer. And we want to see where our hook point sits. You see our hook point's down here. That's going to be no good for us. We want it sitting right about where the line of the body meets the line of the dorsal fin. So we're going to have to bend it out a little bit. In fact, we're going to have to do that on most of our baits, and I want to show you some of these other ones here. This is going to be our medium size that we rig with a 6.0, and we'll mock that up with the eye of the hook at the end of the slot at the nose, slightly under it. This will help the bait ride correctly in the water, with our sinker where it would be between those fins. And you'll notice the very back of the bend of the hook towards the point sits where we want it. Right here. That's just about perfect. We just need this point about 1/4 of an inch up, and we're going to get that. Same thing on our smallest gill. We're going to use the 5.0 to mock it up. The flashy swimmer is a little bit different because the weight is closer to the head than it is to the actual throat of the hook. I've replaced this with a large spring. The large spring is a little bit difficult to place on the smaller bluegill, but will give your bait much better durability. If you don't have the confidence to thread the large spring on the first time, feel free to use the medium spring. But let's look at how this sits. This is going to sit a little different. You'll notice our weight sits right there in front of the fins, and when our hook comes up, we're going to have to open it up quite a bit because it is turned in. Alright, so what we've done is we've gone and mocked up our beast hooks, seen where they match up on our baits, and then we've taken our pliers. I'm going to use a pair of heavy needle nose pliers. I use these Rapala pliers because they've got this cool little hole in them. You can see the light through there. And basically that allows me to grab a hook easily without risk of it slipping. And you always want to bend away from yourself. It's just like cutting with a razor blade because that is sharp, hopefully. So we've got our CPS spring, like we were talking about. We're going to start that at the 6 o'clock position. That's going to be extremely important because we've got this slot here. If we hook the start of this wire into the area around that slot, it's going to deform that plastic. So we're going to center it, push it all the way down so that we start at the 6 o'clock position. The 6 o'clock position is predetermined for us on this bait because it's in that slot. I'm going to thread this on and show you what it looks like, because at the end of the process, our CPS spring is going to be level and recessed in the slot. We'll show you a close-up of that start rigging later, but right now we want to go to our next fundamental, which is to mock it up on the bait. We're going to look at it on this bait right here like this, and what I see is my 10-0 beast hook passing right at the back of that space and blank right there, at that air pocket. And that's good because what that means is my weight is perfectly positioned to take up that space on the hook set. So I'm going to turn my bait over. I'm going to open the bottom. I'm going to start inserting my beast hook. You can see the point of it right there through the bait. And then I'm going to turn and fold just like I did on the other one. But an important step here is when I get to the top, I've got to spread this fin and make sure I'm centered. So let's get the hook up vertical. Before I do that, I want to make a point. If you look at this portion of the hook, this is what's going to be in the bait. It's darn near a straight line as far as hooks go. So when we shoot this through the bait, think straight line. Let's do that right now. I'm coming up. I can feel that I've gone through the bubble because I have no resistance there, and I'm trying to stay in the center of the bait. Now this is the point. See how the bait's all curled up, all funky? Looks terrible right now. Feels impossible. We're going to open up this dorsal fin just like that. Just like that. I'm going to hold it down on the sides of the bait to keep it open, pinch it like that, and when I look for my hook point, I want to see that it's coming through the center, and there it is, right? I can see that hook point coming through the very center of the bait between that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over. We've got these fins on the belly. We're going to spread these so that we have one on either side of the weight, just like that. And what we've got is a perfectly straight, in both dimensions, bluegill. And what we've got here now, hopefully you can see that in the sun, our hook point is sitting exactly where we want it. We can even pull it down just a little bit so that our weight's sitting right there. Now when this thing hits the bottom, it's literally gonna sit like a jig. It wants to sit like a jig. So that's an important part of the presentation, because you can swim this thing, you can wake this thing, but when you stop it, it sits just like a gill does on a bed, or when it's paused, sitting on the bottom. Now that we've gone over the rigging of the large bluegill, this is our 5 1/4 inch bluegill that you see in the packages here. When you buy these bluegills, hopefully by the time you buy these bluegills, we'll have a sticker on the package with a QR code to this video, and that's how you got here. We've rigged this bluegill on a 10-0 hook, and we'll go into rods and why rods are important in a minute, but we want to rig the medium bluegill on a 6-0 hook. Again, we bent this out with our pliers. Our pliers have a convenient hole in them for grabbing a hook so that they can be closed. We can be safe, everything's easy. If you don't have that, it's fine. Use a heavy pair of pliers, not hemostats. Take our CPS spring, find our start. Center our pin. And we're gonna start our start. As we get into these smaller bluegill, they get thinner. So as we apply a large CPS spring, so we keep our bait durable, it's gonna be important that we add some compression. We wanna push into that spring, because what that's gonna do is make sure that the plastic shoulders up on it and it doesn't blow our start out the side of the bait. Again, we've started it right, so we've finished it right. Look at that nose, right? Our hook eye is exactly where we want it, and it's level and it's flush. So, again, we're gonna look at the belly, right? And we spread our belly open, and we can pass our hook eye or hook point in here. And we want to be as vertical as possible. We're holding the bait between our thumb and our forefinger where the hook point is passing, because that's going to keep it square and straight. Then we're going to split our back fins and look for our hook point. I can see my hook point in there, just barely coming out the very center of that bait. So I'm going to hold these down on the sides of the bait like that, and I'm going to make sure that it's coming out where I want it to. It is. And then I'm gonna spread the belly so the fins are on either side of the sinker. I'm gonna push that hook up into the bait, just like that. So you can probably see that whole beast hook silhouetted in that bait. I've got my sinker here, I've got the space where my sinker needs to go in the hook set, and I've got my hook point up here. So what happens when I set the hook and that weight actually goes in that? Well, my hook comes up. It's just like frog fishing. We'll keep going back to frog fishing because there's a lot of similarities, but I want to show you guys that's how easy that is for that to pop up. One of the main advantages of having that big space in there with that split belly and giving that sinker someplace to go, if we didn't have that, if we just had a simple slot, that weight would actually destroy that bait after 3 or 4 fish. The way this is now, you can catch a whole lot of fish on this. When it loosens up, you can push it up like this, heat this portion up with a lighter, and pull it back down. Because you really are at the back of this generous hook slot with the bend of that hook. And I'll show you that right there. So you want that whole point to be up high and forward, and then this is actually in the back where it's retained by the plastic. So I want to show you again, real quick. We got a straight rig bait. We love it. Without getting into rigging the smaller one is more challenging with a large CPS spring. So maybe go with a medium if you're not confident with applying the pressure that you need to actually bulk the bait up enough to get a purchase on there. Let's talk about rods now. Because our 3 different sizes ride 3 distinctly different hooks, we want to be thinking about what rod we would fish another bait with a similar hook on, which is to say, for example, right here, I've got my 4-power jig rod. This is actually my jig rod that I fish a 1/2 ounce football head on, right? And when you talk about that, you're talking about, you know, a 4.0 hook with about the same hook wire as this 5.0 flashy swimmer. So this is our smallest bait. It's a whole lot of fun to fish, and it sits on that light wire hook. Another thing I want to mention about the flashy swimmer is that the flashy swimmer hook has a 1/4 ounce weight, where the 4.0 beast hook has a 1/8 ounce weight. 1/8 ounce weight is not enough to keel this bait. So that's why we go with the flashy swimmer. It's slightly lighter wire, which is friendly for this 4-power rod, 15-pound fluorocarbon leader. We can drive that hook and we can fish this bait all day on it. This is my classic 4-power jig rod. So keep that in mind when we move up. For our middle size bait, if you remember, we have it on that 6.0 beast hook. 6.0 beast hook is pretty substantial when it comes to wire. So what we're looking at there is a 5-power frog rod. This is my 7.4 extra heavy frog rod. I say 5-power, I say 4-power, and I say 6-power throughout this video. So for reference, because companies are slightly different, we'll call a 4-power a 10 to 20 pound rod, a 5-power a 12 to 25, and a 6-power a 15 to 30. Just so that you guys at home can kind of say, that's the rod I got in my arsenal that I want to try this with, because the rods are important. We're also going to talk about one rod that doesn't work with this. We want you guys to be successful, so we're going to warn you against that rod. But you can see this 6.0 beast hook, when it pops out of here, it's substantial, right? That's some serious heavy wire hook. So it looks exactly like the 2 tips on my frog, right? When I look at that double hook on my frog and I look at the wire on the 6.0 beast, I can draw a direct parallel between the gauge of that wire, the length of that point, and the level of exposure that I've got. I've got a completely weedless bait here. So it looks like a frog, it fishes like a frog, fishing on a frog rod. I got 65-pound braid, Corrado 200, like I said, a 5-power frog rod. What's nice about that is a lot of the places you fish this, you fish the frog, and it's good to have that extra power to drag a fish out of something. I've got 20-pound leader on here right now. If you're fishing around wood, if you're fishing heavy stuff, don't be afraid to go up to 25 or 30, but you know, 65-pound braid, the leader your choice. Don't go lighter than 15 on this one. Moving up in power, like I said, you want to be fishing our full-size bluegill on a full-size swim bait rod. And this goes back to what we were just discussing about the gauge of that wire on a 10-0 beast hook, the gap of that hook, and how much plastic you've got to move out of the way to get that hook set. It isn't a whole lot on this bait because the hook slots have been really well designed. But what we got here, the Shimano Calcutta 300D. This rod is a performance tackle SBRX 80 medium. It's basically equivalent to your Loomis 966 rods. 966 is a real popular swim bait rod. It's a 6-power, 8-foot rod, and we've got 25-pound Iser Triple X mono. This is pretty much your run-of-the-mill, day in, day out, lighter swim bait rod. Guys will have a heavier rod with a 400, maybe 8.5 feet for throwing a bigger glide bait. You know, that stuff that really kind of gets up there in the 7 to 10 ounce stuff. But for this kind of thing, this is just our little runaround. So, what are we talking about? 5.0 hook on a 4-power rod of 15 pound. 6.0 hook on a 5-power rod with 20 or 25 pound, and a 10.0 hook on a 6 or a 7-power rod at 25 pound. Those are going to drive those hooks. They're going to get your fish in, right? We'll talk about how to swing on a fish with these things after we talk about which rods not to use. Which rod don't we want to use? Look at this guy right here. This is a beautiful rod. I've caught a ton of fish on this rod. It works great. This is a chatterbait rod. It is fiberglass. I want to show you guys something. Look at that. Hopefully that terrifies you. That thing is folded up. The problem with that, with our baits, if you're fishing a soft, moderate, or parabolic rod designed for crankbaits or chatterbaits, the only way to hook a fish is to lock your drag and point the rod directly at the fish and wind it on. At that point, you might as well not have a rod. If you're fishing this on too soft a rod, like this chatterbait rod, finesse spinning rod, you're never gonna get any hook penetration. You might get a skin hook. You're gonna get to watch that fish come up, shake its head. You get to see a big, beautiful fish, and it's gone because it threw that bait because the rod was too soft. That's what we're trying to caution against here. Fish something with a good shutoff. It doesn't have to be extra fast. It can be fast to moderate, but something that when you swing, you know you can drive that hook. That's what we've got about rods right now. I fish a lot of braid to leader, except on the big swim bait rod because 25-pound mono seems to work there. So let's make a couple casts. We're gonna show you guys a couple tricks right there. Before we head down to the water, because we're gonna be a little bit away from the camera, casting at the camera, and the audio is not gonna be great, I wanna make a note here. If you take this bait and you overhand cast it, it's gonna go up and it's gonna sail around like a wet tortilla. You're not gonna have a whole lot of directional control over that bait on an overhand cast. The same can be said for most bluegill profile baits. The bluegill profile is the point of the bait, so how can we work our way around that? I recommend kind of a low slung sidearm cast. It's gonna dial out a whole lot of that wavering that you get from any wind action, and it's gonna allow you to cast much more precisely and with much more control. So let's go down and take a look at what that looks like. So let's do it. All right, friends, we hope you enjoyed this rigging video. Hope it gets you where you need to be in terms of getting out on the water and being successful with the Sudden Impact Baits Suzy Gill. If you have any questions about rigging the bait, fishing the bait, anything like that, find us on Instagram. We're Sudden_Impact_Swimbaits on Instagram. You can shoot us a direct message there. We'll answer any questions you have that we didn't cover in this video. And we're looking forward to putting together an extended swim video in the near future. So be well, good luck, good fishing, take care.